by their deeds you shall know them. So when politicians in DC gives their staffers and lawyers and folks working inside the Beltway a raise of 21% in one of the latest bills, now you look at this and go, interesting. So around 8 to 9%, 16% is what John Williams is saying at Shadow Stats, but it's more, even if you add a little buffer of 5%, 21% is the raise that they're getting. Folks living there. So it's clearly out there for folks to see. And to your point of becoming an investor, we had a classic Cantillon Effect in 2020. I always say to folks that you almost don't have to read the work of Richard Cantillon. Well, he was French, so we call him Richard. But you almost don't have to read his work. You could just actually look at what happened, where you had this massive increase in currency supply, which isn't by the very definition in inflation. And what happened? What did the different characters in this environment do? Well, just as Richard Cantillon saw, the folks closest positioned to positions of power, government, on the inside, well, what did they do? Well, they took this newly created currency. They had access to the trough first, and some of them leveraged it to acquire more lending and even make that their piece a little bit bigger. But they also positioned themselves in assets as investors. So they either had hard assets, real estate, or they acquired businesses. And then, of course, you get the folks closest to the position of power enjoying the newly created currency first, and then it goes through the rest of the economy. It circles and it hits the middle class. And as you mentioned, what do? Well, your cost of living is now up significantly. Do you get your 5% increase from your employer, and that bumps you into the next tax bracket? So now you're taking home even less. That's why the game's designed that way. Or do you look at what the folks were doing that were getting access to this newly created currency first? So by the time it gets to, unfortunately, the folks at the bottom rung on the economic ladder, they just see prices of everything around them increase, and then also the goods of services. So the ultra wealthy folks that are getting access to it first, they benefit from asset inflation, then of course also from price inflation through their businesses, and of course the middle class is the area getting squeezed significantly, and then the folks at the bottom rung on the economic ladder, they essentially, see everything that they need for survival, whether it be food, whether it be clothing, or it be rent, skyrocketing. So it's almost, if you look at it, if you take a step back, I always say, like, man, you don't even have to read his work. You just basically saw this on display, but you have a very good strategy of going on the offense. So why don't you jump into that and share a little bit about this inflation triple crown that you're excited to share?
Oh, you bring up so many good points there. And John Williams, I think it's shadowstats.com is the name of his website. What he does is tries to reconstruct the true diminished purchasing power of the dollar based on how the CPI was calculated 30 and 40 years ago. I've talked to John Williams before. Yep. But yeah, you bring up the Cantillon effect. When money is printed, those closest to the money are the ones that have the wherewithal to buy assets to actually benefit from inflation, where those consumers on the other end, have it debased. The Uber driver that now has to substitute chicken for steak or something like that. They're on the other end of that. So how can we, as an everyday investor, just an everyday person with pretty average means, how can you get closer to the money printer and really get closer on that Cantillon effect, get closer on that chain to being the beneficiary and use inflation as a wealth creation rather than a wealth debasement measure? And there are a few different ways in order to hedge yourself against inflation. Some people like to buy Bitcoin. If you think that's an inflation hedge, it's somewhat of a debate right now. People like Bitcoin because it has a fixed supply of 21 million. It only has an inflation rate of 1.7%. Right now, gold is the classic inflation hedge. It's one of the few things that's had value for millennia. The supply isn't quite fixed, but it only increases at 1% to 2% per year. But those are ways to hedge yourself against inflation. But hedging is being defensive With real estate, my favorite asset to invest in inflationary times, you can actually benefit from inflation 3 ways at the same time, which is what I call the inflation triple crown. You can do that when you buy an income producing piece of real estate with a loan. You actually win. You actually profit from inflation 3 ways at the same time. And this is something available to everyday people. It's something I've been doing for years. The 3 crowns in the inflation triple crown are price inflation, because it actually benefits you in this case, debt debasement, and then the third is cash flow enhancement. So just to use some really simple examples, we'll stick with that 10% inflation. Let's just say you have $1 million worth of real estate that you purchase with a 20% down payment. That's usually the down payment you need to make if you don't occupy the property yourself. And that $1 million, hey, $1 million ain't what it used to be, you know? So this is a $200K down payment. That's all that's coming out of your pocket. It's still a pretty significant investment. That might be an apartment building. And MCA used to say, oh, that's about 5 like single family rental homes. Well, maybe that's 3 today. But in any case, with $1 million in real estate, if you have 10% inflation and the real estate value just tracks that, well, now you have $1.1 million worth of real estate. And maybe you're thinking, okay, well, aren't I right back where I started? Because now I have 10% more dollars, but each dollar is worth 10% less. And the answer is actually no, you're not right back where you started. Because remember, you purchased this with the loan. So you only put $200K into it. So with your $100,000 increase in the overall value of your real estate, your equity position, your down payment just went from $200K up to $300K. That's a 50% rate of return on your skin in the game, even though inflation was only 10%. And some people are like, well, wait, how did that happen? That's because you got a 10% return on both your $200K down payment and the $800K borrowed from the bank. That's your return, not the bank's. That's part of the concept of financial leverage. You had 5-to-1 leverage, a 50% gain, even though inflation was just 10%.